All right, good morning, everyone. I think we are about 3 after, so we're going to go ahead and jump into things, okay? My name is Ruth Schneider, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you today with Dr. Susky.
Good afternoon, or good morning / afternoon. It's afternoon where I'm, from Pittsburgh, so that's where I'm coming from.
And so today we're going to spend the next hour talking about common cognitive symptoms in Huntington's disease. So first, we have our introductory slide from the HDSA. Give you a moment to absorb that. And then here's the QR code. If you would like to do a survey on this workshop, you can take a snap of this and go ahead and do that after. I know nobody likes to sit up front, but there are some chairs up front here for those folks who are just walking in. So before we get started, here are our, do you want me to go back? I see somebody wanting, okay, go ahead. No problem. So here are our disclosures for the talk. I do have some outside research funding, but none of it is relevant to Huntington's disease work or what we're talking about here today. So I think, as you probably all know, cognitive symptoms are common in Huntington's disease, and they can really cover a broad spectrum. And rather than spending our time going over every symptom that we can see in the realm of cognition in Huntington's disease, we thought it might be more helpful to just take 2 common areas of difficulties and take a bit of a deeper dive into those symptoms. So we selected executive dysfunction and perceptual problems. So I'm going to tackle executive dysfunction first, and then Dr. Susky is going to take over with perceptual problems and talk about visual spatial deficits, time management difficulties, and lack of awareness. Okay, so in order to talk about executive dysfunction, we first have to understand what is executive function, right? I think many of you have probably heard this term, and we often refer to it as those higher order cognitive difficulties or cognitive abilities. And it really has 3 kind of core features or 3 building blocks, and those are working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. And we'll go through each of these in turn, just briefly, so we're all kind of starting at the same point as to what these terms mean. So working memory is the ability to hold onto and work with information in your mind. So it's not simply remembering something, it's taking that information in and manipulating it. It's connecting it to some other piece of information. So what does that really mean? That means if somebody gives you steps, like directions, a list of directions, you can remember the first thing that they said and relate it to the most recent step in the directions. It means when you're reading a book, you can recall what happened a little bit earlier in that chapter as you're reading what's happening now in the story, and kind of integrate that new information together. So that's our first part of executive function. Our second component of executive function is inhibitory control. And this is essentially the ability to control your behavior, your emotions, your attention, and your thoughts, right? It's a form of self-control. It's how we think before we act. So as an example, if we are having a conversation with somebody and we don't like what they say, it's what tells us not to interrupt and say something that's hurtful or rude, right? That's our inhibitory control working. It also helps us control our attention. So as another example, if we're having a conversation with somebody and the television is on in the background, or there's a dog that's outside and barking, this is what helps me pay attention to the person that I'm talking to and not attend to the television or the dog, because what I want to be doing is talking to the person I'm talking to. So that's inhibitory control. The third building block for executive function is cognitive flexibility. And sometimes we'll refer to this as fluid thinking. This is our ability to kind of think about things from a different perspective, to see them differently, and to shift between topics, right? So this is my ability to shift from thinking about this book I was just reading to what I'm going to make for dinner, or when I need to pick up my kid from his soccer practice. It gives us the ability to think outside of the box and to kind of adjust to the unexpected, right? Adjust to a change in our normal routine. And it really helps us to think creatively and to problem solve as different situations arise. So these three building blocks, working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control, they all contribute to our ability to reason, to plan and organize, and to problem solve. And so just knowing that, you can see how a problem in this area can really be disruptive to life, right? And really kind of affect all spheres of our life. So now that we know what executive function is, we can talk about what executive dysfunction looks like. So I'm not going to cover every possible presentation of this, just some common things that I often hear, and that some of you or your loved ones may be experiencing. So this can look like having trouble paying attention or focusing on the thing that you need to be paying attention to. Or on the other hand, it can be being hyper-focused on, needing to fix the car or what you're going to make for dinner, when there are other things that really need your attention right now and that you should be focusing on instead. It can present as trouble with what we call goal-directed behavior, or thinking through, what do I need to do in order to achieve this goal, right? So whether that's I'm going to a soccer game this weekend, or I'm planning a vacation. What are the steps that I need to take in order to get where I want to be, right? It can also present as impulsivity. So I gave that example of how inhibitory control in a conversation helps us kind of not interrupt and interject. So it can look like that. It can look like interrupting a conversation, saying things impulsively. We can also see difficulty with starting a task. And this might in particular be with things that we're maybe not looking so forward to doing. So those tasks that we're not super excited about may be really difficult to get started with them. Or we may have trouble shifting between tasks. So we may have trouble shifting from thinking about that soccer game to thinking about what we need to make for dinner, and transitioning between activities. This can also present as trouble kind of prioritizing what needs to happen now versus what can wait until later today, or maybe what can wait until later on in this week or this weekend. And so perhaps you can see how trouble with executive function can really impact all aspects of our life. So we can see poor performance at school or at work, difficulty in managing our relationships, and difficulty with the day-to-day, right? So everything from, meal prep for the week to figuring out family schedules. Because planning, organization, problem solving, reasoning, those are all critical skills that we need. All right, so now that we understand what executive function is and what executive dysfunction might look like, we can shift gears and talk about things we can do to help manage executive dysfunction. Now, I wish I could tell you that I had a medication that really slows the cognitive decline in Huntington's disease. Unfortunately, that's not the case yet. That said, there are things that we can do to help our executive system perform at its best, and we'll talk through some of those. So I'm going to start by talking about what I'm calling contributing factors here. And these are things that put too much stress on our executive system for anyone, right? And we can, if we're mindful of these and pay attention to these, we can help to reduce some of the stress on our executive system. So poor sleep and stress. it's easy for me to stand up here and say you should all get a good night's sleep every night and lead a low-stress life. And I realize that's almost comical because that's nearly impossible to achieve. But perhaps then we can just remember that if you or your loved one slept poorly last night, you can understand, you know what, today I might not be, or they might not be at their cognitive best, right? Today might be a little bit more of a challenge. Today might be a little bit harder than a typical day. And try our best that night to improve sleep and to try to reduce stress as much as possible. We want to avoid what we call cognitive overload. And this is simply putting too much information, too much stress on the system, right? So if I'm thinking about what I'm making for dinner, when I need to pick my kids up from their activities, this email that I have to send, this problem that's happening at work, I am overloading my system, and I can't handle that. I can't handle all of that at the same time. And so how do we remove some of that load and kind of deload the demands on our cognitive system is really important. We know also that alcohol use, excessive alcohol use, can impact our executive function system. So it's important to be mindful of that as well. And we can also see that depression can impact our executive function as well. And so if you're feeling low or sad or irritable or down, know that that could be depression and that is something that is treatable and that we have both medication and non-medication options for treating that. So try to keep these contributing factors in mind as we go through kind of more specific things that may help manage some of those day-to-day cognitive symptoms. For the folks in the back, there are a few seats up here. If anyone wants to come on up, feel free. I won't be offended if you decide to stay back there too. All right, so the first kind of set of things that I'm going to talk about for managing cognitive symptoms are those that can really help with organization. And so these are primarily calendars and different types of lists. I think a lot of folks like analog methods. So you want to have a paper calendar, or you want to have a piece of paper or a journal that you can use to kind of set your schedule and to put down everything that you need to do. Other people prefer to use digital methods. So there are smartphone apps that you can use as calendars. There are different list-taking apps. It's really kind of what works for you, right? And that's a good reminder for me to remind you all that I'm going to present a lot of different strategies that may be helpful. Not all of them are going to work for you, and you don't need to do all of them, but maybe there are a few here that you kind of decide are worth trying. That's the goal. So whether it's a digital or an analog way of managing calendars and creating to-do lists and other task lists, if you decide to do this, one thing you may want to consider is having a family meeting on a regular basis to kind of just have a touch point and say, okay, this is the schedule for today or for the next 2 days or for the week, whatever works for you. You gotta make sure that everybody is on the same page. Other things that can be helpful, timers can be really useful, and I know Dr. Susky is gonna talk about time management and timers as well. But I find that sometimes these can help people switch tasks when maybe you're having trouble, again, shifting gears, shifting between doing one activity and another. Setting a timer can be a helpful way to kind of remind yourself it's time to move on to the next thing. Sticky notes. Sticky notes are wonderful. They are inexpensive, they are multicolored, and they're easy to put up and take down. And they can be a nice way to kind of set reminders for yourself to help keep you organized. And you can put them up anywhere that is convenient for you, where you're going to really see them. And then if you have something that you want to do, right? So maybe it's I'm working on planning a vacation, or I'm going to this big football game that's coming up. And you have that goal. That may seem really kind of intimidating. It may seem overwhelming to come up with all the things that you need to do to get to that goal. And so what I would encourage you all to do is try to break that down as much as possible into things that seem manageable, right? So what is the first thing that I need to do? Work on that, and then build from there. Next, I talked before about how with executive dysfunction, it can be really difficult to pay attention to just the thing you're supposed to be paying attention to right now. And so it can be really helpful to try to do just one thing at a time, right? So we don't want to have conversations about what the weekend schedule looks like while we're washing dishes and watching television all at the same time. That's not a setup for success. We want to, as I mentioned before, do what we can to minimize overload on the system. And so again, rather than talking about multiple different things that need to happen at the same time, start with one. And some of you may notice that you have times of the day where you're kind of at your best, right? So for me, this is first thing in the morning. When I want to do all the challenging things that I don't really want to do at work, first thing in the morning is when I do them. This is going to be different for everybody. But if you notice that there is a time of day where you're kind of at your best or your loved one is at the best, you can take advantage of that and plan the things that really require you to be cognitively your best for that time of day. And then lastly, we'll kind of come back to the environment, right? Again, I just think as much as we can control the environment and minimize distractions, I think this really can be helpful for managing executive symptoms. And so one important thing is establishing a routine or a structure to your day. As we talked before about how when we start to lose that cognitive flexibility, it can be really hard to adapt to things that are different or out of the usual. And again, the importance of having a regular sleep schedule and trying to maintain a calm environment as much as possible. I didn't put it up here, but we also know that there are some benefits from doing exercise. And so safe exercise on a regular basis can help to boost our executive function. So that is my last slide. So before I hand things over to Dr. Seski, I'll just say that we have built in plenty of times for questions at the end, and we certainly welcome them then. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to keep my timer too. So the one thing I've noticed, and you'll notice too, I just want to start off by saying life happens. We cannot control everything that happens in our life, right? There's things that are just not expected that kind of can throw things off and kind of make us a little scatterbrained. That's what I'm going to call it. So these are just ways to kind of try to fine-tune life. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little example about how well I was thinking at the end of the day, and I probably shouldn't have been making any really important decision making any really buying a house or buying a car last night. So my husband and I are flying here. So that was last night, not last night, but the night before, right? We packed, we got everything ready, we laid out our clothes, we put their bags by the door, and so we slept 2 hours only because we had to leave our house at 3 a.m. The flight was at 5 a.m., so we rushed out of the house and we're going to the airport. Not that much traffic, but a little bit of traffic. Get to the airport, and the place that it's a familiar airport for me. I go there all the time, and right where I always park, there's a little bit of construction. And it's trying to veer me in all different ways. And my husband's like, you gotta go this way. And I'm like, I gotta go to that way. And so it was a little bit chaotic. Plus, we wanted to get to our flight on time and so there was a little bit of a rush. So we get to the airplane, still 2 hours of sleep, just keep that in mind. Get here, and it's hot, right? And I didn't drink water the entire time. And I'm outside, we're walking, we want to see the sights, and I'm not drinking my water, so I'm probably a little dehydrated on top of it. Passing by Bourbon Street, and there was a little bit of secondhand smoke. We know what that is. You've all smelt it already, right? And, and now we're in an unfamiliar place, and, trying to navigate around and trying to get back to where we were. So life happens, right? There's just times that you know that you're not on your best behavior with your mental capacity. So just kind of keep that in mind. And like Dr. Snyder said, there are times that you're going to know that this is going to be a bad day, right? We all have good days, bad days, but we're just trying to minimize a little bit. So I'm going to break this down to visual, spatial, time management, and unawareness. And the other thing that I was going to say that you may notice is we have two people presenting to you today, and we have the same goal, right? We're trying to give you the information, but we are two different personalities. She's very routine. She got her presentation done, but almost a month ago. No, like a couple weeks ago. Mine was done an hour ago. She was here. What time did you get here? Early. I'm walking in the door after the elevator shut down because I was stuck on the 43rd floor. So I'm walking in at the last second. Her slides are very organized, and mine are a little bit more chaotic. And so this is like families, right? There's no two families. I always say that our brains are like snowflakes. There are never two brains that are the same, even in the same family. So we may have someone who's a little bit more rigid with thinking and someone that is not. And it doesn't even have to be HD related, right? It's just sometimes there's a little of this, okay? All right, so visual spatial defects. What really is this? This is loss of spatial awareness. And so this is like problems with judging where your body's at in time and space and other objects, or recognizing the objects around you. So how can this cause a problem? Well, if I don't know where my body's at, I might bump into things. And as we get older, our skin gets thinner, so we get some bleeding or tearing, and sometimes we get bruising. So we can injure ourselves. Now, there is movements that are involved with Huntington's, but this is a little different. This is just the perceptual problem. So, I might be trying to mend my socks and having a hard time with, and it's not just a visual thing, it's knowing where your body's sort of at in time and space. Getting where your food is at on the plate as well. So we can get lost in familiar places. So like it was yesterday morning, we were going to the airport. We go to the airport all the time, and it was a familiar spot, but my husband was a little confused on where we normally parked. So driving is a big problem, and driving is always associated with independence. Nobody wants us to talk about driving and the fact that we will lose our ability to drive sooner or later. But driving is really multitasking, and my son just got his driver's license, and I was trying to explain for him, you have to be a good driver for you, but you also have to be a good driver for everybody else's driving abilities. So you have to know how fast they're going, how fast you're going, and where the distance is between the cars. So kind of some tips for management, and as you can see, my first one says minimize clutter. That's a whole bunch of clutter right there on that slide. So if we like to hoard or kind of collect things, let's call it, and we have it all over our house, it may be hard to navigate around these objects, and we may bump into them a little bit more. Minimize chaos or distraction. So I always say that we live on autopilot. Our brains really try to tune out a lot of things just to navigate through life. You really are not sitting there thinking, I have to keep my posture up, I have to keep the muscles contracted so I'm not flopping over, I'm breathing, I'm blinking, I'm swallowing, I'm feeling, my heart is going. So you don't have to think about all of this. Your brain goes on autopilot. So sometimes when we go off of autopilot, we are able to navigate around a little bit better. So if there are trigger areas in the house that you have problems with, you may want to go off of autopilot. I always say the word slow down. I've written it, we don't have prescription paper anymore, but I used to write it down on, out for people, and they would stick it on the refrigerator. So slow down, especially when you're in a busy or an unfamiliar place. You may want to get your eyes checked because sometimes there are other things that contribute to how you're seeing things, and it could be that you need to have an annual eye exam. You want to do things in good lighting. Sometimes we tell people to put night lights up or to do things during the lighter time of the day. Sometimes with the darkness, your brain plays a little bit of trick on you with your eyes. If there's an area like a table or a counter that you bump into, you may want to put bumper pads up. This is the time of the year where the dollar store has those pool noodles. You can slit them down and stick them on the table. Sometimes you can go to your Home Depot or Lowe's. I'm not associated with any of them, but they have colorful duct tape of every sort, and you can like put big, places like where there are trigger areas if there are doorways, just to kind of get you off of autopilot in that area. You can also do home safety evaluations. So somebody can come into your house and say, this is where, that would be a little bit, with handrails and things like that. So there are home safety evaluations you can do. All right, driving. So I always say start the conversation early than later. You may want to look into, like, some people have lots of different modes of transportation, like options for them. So, taxi services and things like that. When people live a little outside of the city, it may not be as much there, but, is there a family member that could help out with driving if driving becomes a problem? Have a good conversation with your family, keep an open dialogue. So it's not like if and when this happens, it's not like you're being attacked. Sometimes, like I said, driving is just like equated to independence, and it shouldn't be. I mean, there's other ways of getting around. But you want to make sure that you're safe for you and everybody around you. So drive in the best conditions if you're driving, so that's better weather, daytime, short distances, not going on the highway, not going down Bourbon Street, and on a Friday night, or going in familiar areas. It will help us out. I always look for the scratch and dings on the car if you're a family member, just to see if there are some problems with bumping into or going into the garage, so we know that there are problems with visual spatial. I say never rush, never rush, never rush. Leave early as much as you can. In navigation, those apps on the phone or on the car are great. It will tell you what your ETA is, so it kind of takes that stress level away of when am I going to make it there, when am I going to make it there, is there going to be traffic? Now, they're not always 100% accurate because, construction in Pittsburgh is all the time and it just pops up everywhere. But it can help us where to go and what's the shortest distance to get us where we want to go. I can't even remember the last time I used a map. Remember them and you couldn't fold them back up afterwards? So if you're driving, I always say eliminate chaos. So phone calls, no one should be answering phone. Screaming kids, you really can't eliminate screaming kids, but you may want to. But you may want to, if your kids are starting to act up, you may want to pull off or go into a parking lot, kind of calm them down. No eating in the car. Loud radios can really play havoc as well. There are certain cars, if you have the ability to do it, there are certain cars that have safety features with parking sensors or that parking where it parks itself. I'm always kind of leery about that, but they can do that now. Lane departure where kind of beeps or like jiggles. Auto braking if something comes in front of you, or backup cameras. I mean, I think we all should be using some of this stuff. I mean, sometimes it's really hard to judge your own driving. We all think we're perfect drivers. My husband swears he's a great driver, and he's not. But, I mean, that's why it's such an important thing to have an open dialogue with your family and your doctor, too. We can do formal driver's evaluations if need be as well. All right, time management. So it's using our time effectively and productively. All right, so I didn't push start for my time. That's great. Chaos. All right, so what can this affect? Well, if we're going to our job and we're constantly late, we might lose our job. If we're not able to work effectively during the day, we may not get our projects done. So jobs might be lost with time management problems. If we're not managing our time well, we're going to be more likely to be anxious or irritable, which I felt like that on the way down here. Almost had to walk down 43 flights of steps. We might be late for appointments, doctor's appointments, right? So if you show up, some doctors, like 15 minutes late, they cancel your appointment and make you come back, and it may not be for 6 months down the road or a year down the road. So that can cause me some stress. Missing important events, weddings, funerals, getting to church on time, that always seems like it's a big thing. Now, the movements in the executive dysfunction also may slow this process down, like when you're trying to get ready. So it's that we may not notice that or perceive that we need a little bit more times. And I always say, try to give your loved ones the independence. So as long as they can do it, let them do it. But if you have to get somewhere ahead of time, you may want to help out if they're starting to struggle, or if time is starting to be a constraint. So allowing yourself extra time, setting alarms and reminders, doing the calendars, I'm a big fan of. Like we laid our clothes out the night before and put the bags by the door, and then using navigation. All right, so the unawareness. So we have some big fancy medical terms, right? So agnosia. So this is the inability to interpret sensations or recognize things, or it's like a lack of insight. You know, we see this when there's like if anybody does like those clinical trials, we ask the caregiver and the patient, how do you think your disability is? Like, how do you think your anxiety or, your perception? And there can be a big gap, chaos, right? So we're all starting to like focus over there. See, once again. All right, so we can have some problems with this unawareness with recognizing facial expressions and emotions. So I would like to say that my husband knows when I'm angry. And I talk with my forehead. Sometimes he doesn't, and so sometimes just don't assume that your loved one knows what you're feeling. So there might be, because of this, there might be a problem with the awareness of what you need and what you're wanting. There could be an unawareness of disability, so that could lead to not going to the doctor, to delay the diagnosis, to delay the treatment. Going to that I need to go to the doctors every so often, so it can delay care. There might be an unawareness of hygiene, so you need to brush your teeth so many times, and you need to take showers. And so sometimes even putting these in calendars are good. If we are not doing this hygiene part, we can have infections, which can lead to other medical problems. Awareness of the ability to work and the desire to drive, I understand, is there, but sometimes we are not aware that we should not be driving anymore. So tips. I always say avoid conflict. I know that sometimes we want to express what we feel, but sometimes if it's starting to escalate, we need to back it down and maybe talk about it at a time where things are calmer. Have an open dialogue, like I said, with your family and your doctors. Keeping a schedule for routines and hygiene, I think, is good. Take out the garbage on Fridays and things like that. I love when families write lists of everything that's wrong. Patients don't like it as much, but I love them because, first of all, I can read them really fast and focus on what needs to happen. Because if we as doctors are not aware of what's happening, we can't help. Now, she's right, we don't have great medicines for this, but we have lots of tips. So I get family messages prior to appointments, and then the lists I'm a great fan of. And then having someone come with the patient. Even if you're not able to, you can always tell them what you want to relay over to the physician. If there's a problem with knowing that I have to pay my IRS or my taxes, you may want to look into guardianships or conservatorships or third-party payees that can take care of bills. You can look at maintenance people coming at a routine, or like someone to cut the grass every so often, or someone to help with cleaning as well. So one more time with the fine tuning, like I gave that story beforehand, dehydration can really make you not think so well. Sleeping well, I had 2 hours of sleep and was not up to my game. Eating well, so malnutrition can also affect how our bodies are. Concentrating on one thing at a time as much as we can. We live in a multitasking world. There's so much technology where people are walking and chewing gum and texting and, listening to something on the phone. We should really, our brains really only want to do one thing at a time, even though we kind of don't. limiting the chaos, and then limiting the mind-altering substances like on Bourbon Street. It's perfect that we're here, right? And then keeping a routine. Like I said, life happens. Life happens, and there are things that pop up that are unexpected and things that we cannot control. So we just kind of have to roll with the punches. But these are just some tips that we have that kind of hopefully make life a little bit easier. So that we are going to do questions. We're supposed to do a dialogue with each other. We've never done this before, so.
I just want to say, although we've been joking about our different styles, I didn't realize it was going to be fodder for your presentation today,
Yeah.
Dr. Sesky.
Because it was last second. I added that in last second, see?
So, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about driving.
Yeah.
This comes up so often in clinic, and I think it's so incredibly hard to navigate that conversation. When do you start talking about it?
So I start the conversation pretty early, just because, I always make the comment that sooner or later we all lose the ability to drive. And this is Huntington's or any other disease. I try to start the conversation early, but it is, like I say, driving is independence for most people, and we do take a lot of, people get very angry with us, and we try to eliminate that, and sometimes we take the brunt of the anger so the families don't have to. We do have a formal driving evaluation available for us. It does cost money. I wish it was something that, I guess a while ago it was just done with the occupational therapy, but I think the minimal cost for our formal driver's evaluation is $250 out of pocket. And a lot of times if they know that there's a neurodegenerative disease like Huntington's or Parkinson's, they will ask to reevaluate in a year. Sometimes that is nice if you do pass with them because you put it in your driver's box or your glove box, and so if you do get pulled over, you can show that you did pass. Now, I had someone who got into an accident that because of an ice storm, and she got the car went into a ditch. The police came. She's like, I need to go get that paper from my glove box, and they wouldn't allow her. So then things kind of escalated. But sometimes it's just something that because problems with cognition does worsen over time. This might be something that has to be reevaluated and reevaluated and reevaluated. I don't know if there's any easier way that you guys are doing it, or...
No, I love the independent driving evaluations. I think they are particularly helpful when there's disagreement in the clinic room between whether driving is safe or not, right? And so it's nice to have somebody independent do those evaluations. And I just want to emphasize for those who are not familiar with them that it typically involves answering some questions. Sorry, I'm not in front of the microphone. Answering some questions about driving, but then also actually getting in the car with somebody and going through the motions of driving, right? You can imagine that's a much better assessment of your ability to drive than me sitting in my office chair and telling you I don't think it's safe for you to be driving. One thing that I've learned from actually the Alzheimer's Association, they have driving contracts that I've started to look at a bit, but it's a nice way to kind of help you start this conversation really early and something you can come back to down the road when driving starts to be a problem.
So in our area, our driver's evaluations can be done by driver schools. So these might be the same places that are doing like the 16-year-olds. So even if you call those driver schools, you can say, do you do adults, or and they may know who to refer you to if you don't know who's in your area. But I like the contract. So I even, at one point, we have our clinic, our multidisciplinary clinic, I even brought a person who does those behind-the-wheel driver's evaluations, and she has the cars with the 2 steering wheels and the 2 sets of pedals, like the double cars. And I asked her, what on the exam can you tell us that would be a red flag that we would say we need to like pull the license right then and there? And she had a hard time with telling us. So this is a struggle for physicians as well, of when is the time. So we have some patients that as soon as they don't feel comfortable or it's causing them more stress, they just hand the keys over. But then there are times that that does not happen.
I live in Wisconsin, and I had a friend of mine, and he was getting tickets piled up.
In small accidents.
Small
He had
accidents.
Huntington's
And
and
he had Huntington's. And we just called the police. I know state police.
Yeah, you can do that. Family members or loved ones or neighbors could.
Yeah.
It was what? That's
well, no, his wife didn't know how to handle it, because she wanted him to stop driving, but yet,
So
he
did I.
didn't want to listen to her and stuff, and so
Right.
he asked if we could help, and because we were good friends. And we
Right, so
we drove to
sometimes
the police.
when it's coming from a third party telling people to drive, sometimes it's, or like the physician saying it's time to stop driving, it's a little different than a spouse. So what they were saying is they had a friend who kept getting tickets, because I know we have to say it into the microphone, kept getting tickets, and the wife asked them to kind of call the police and pull the license. So that can happen too.
Yeah. And then I'll just add that this does differ state by state. So in New York State, we're a physician non-reporting state. So we never call the DMV up and say, hey, my patient should not be driving. But that differs from.
Oh, Pennsylvania, we do. So the problem is Pennsylvania, if you all would get into an accident in Pennsylvania and you're my patient, the person you get into an accident with can sue us for not pulling the license. So we are in a very litigious state. So it might be, we have some physicians that as soon as they diagnose, they say stop driving.
In Houston, I don't drive anymore, but they have a service called Perceptual, and it can come in, it's shared service, so a lot of people don't know about it, so I try to tell them.
Yeah, so cities, the bigger cities will have these shared companies that are like taxi cabs or like super shuttle or whatever you call them. You have to make the appointment ahead of time, and they do cost a little bit of money, but they're like cheaper than a taxi, or they might be free. But you do have to make arrangements, and I always say pack a lunch and a book whenever you go, because they will send you an hour early or 5 hours early than your appointment and pick you up, at midnight. I mean, so you just have to, it's a great resource. I love them, but it can be a little frustrating and if you are not there at the stop when they tell you to, then they will leave, and then you have to wait longer.
I think at this time we can open up to other questions.
So this is tips for motivation. And we didn't really talk about apathy. Apathy is the get up and go has gone up and went. So a lot of these cognitive things are kind of overlapping. For us, we tell caregivers and loved ones to tell and not ask, like, do you want to go to the store? I'm going to say no every time because I hate shopping. But if you're saying we're going to the store, we're leaving now, you have to also say, this is going to be mental stimulation. Going out and being amongst the world and having, it can be a little stressful for people, but it also can be stimulating and it can help with cognition. So I always say, tell and say we're going, not do you. Oh, schedule, and then do it. Check it off and say, I have to. I think.
Trouble initiating, like I'm just stuck on the couch and I just can't get started.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think the other tips I would say, if you have, you can schedule time to do something, right? So for me, just as an example, I might schedule time where I'm writing, because otherwise I don't really want to do it. And it's hard for me to kind of get into the groove. And then I get a lot of satisfaction out of crossing things off a list. And if you were like that, you might consider something like a bullet journal or some other type of list making where you can say, okay, my goal for today was to do X. I did X. That's great. I'm going to cross it off. The other thing that can be helpful is having like an accountability partner. So if there's somebody that you can identify who you can share your goals with, you want to tell them, I recognize this is an issue that I have, I want to work on it, this is my goal for the week. Maybe they can help you stay accountable for achieving those goals.
So that's even true for exercise, because we all tend to not exercise, right? So for me, I have to exercise first thing in the morning, because if I don't, I get distracted. So there are things that I know that I schedule first thing in the morning, and I'm a cross-off person too. Like, I have things on my list that you would expect not to be on a list, just because I have such satisfaction of clicking that box and making that task go away. It just gives me personal satisfaction. So scheduling for me is huge, and I write lists, but the thing is, you got to remember to look at those lists. So I make sure that I look at my list every day and say, I need to take one thing off of my list every day. And so that's just it's like personal goals. But there's no medications. People always want to know, what's the magic pill for motivation?
For me, it was exercise. And walk. At the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes exercise releases those natural endorphins, and then you feel better. And you can feel more motivated.
Well, just walk a little bit more.
And just going for a walk, getting outside too. That's what I like. I like this, nature helps with depression.
I didn't like
and
it
it's
at all before.
listen to the
Now I walk
birds.
3 miles a day.
Nice.
Yeah, just going to fill in the audience that's online. So some comments in the front about the importance of exercising, even just walking on a regular basis and getting outdoors. I'll share that my New Year's Eve resolution this year was to get outside every day and appreciate nature. So I recognize the value and the importance of that. And I think there's a question back a few rows there. Great. So the suggestion was to make sure and understand what your motivation is, and that a little reward can go a long way.
You just setting a goal of just one, even if you just did one task that day, and then it's just like, oh, okay, and then, maybe the next day you can do 2 tasks, and just start small, don't roll, geez, I gotta clean the whole house.
Yes.
Wow.
So sometimes,
That's what he does, so Rick gets overwhelmed with that stuff too, so it's just like, I'm just gonna clean this bathroom today and call it a day.
So sometimes putting it on the calendar, I have a dry erase board that's right next to my coffee pot. I see it every day, and I put the tasks for the week. And I try to space it out as much as possible. If you have a cluttered room, you go in and you just do one corner. You don't, because sometimes what happens is when you see the big pile or you're seeing the big picture, it's stressful, it's anxiety inducing. If you just do a little at a time, it's like slow and steady wins the race, and you'll get it done. But if you look at the whole picture, like moving and there's a million boxes, 1 box a day unpack, and that's it. You don't try to tackle the world. There was a question right there. With problems things that are hard to some of the things like the sleep deprivation and those things like infection. Oh, I also had a blister on my toe, so I had pain involved, so I was focusing on that. That can really affect the short-term memory. I mean, so that's the day-to-day stuff. If you have a little bit of inattention, it's a little bit more of the short-term memory. Exercise overall is going to be beneficial for our mental stimulation and can help with short-term, long-term. Doing new tasks. I have some really bizarre things that people will tell me they do. One person told me he was going to learn Finnish, and I said, are you going to Finland? And he said no, but it was something that he wanted to do. So, I think those can help. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the benefits of sleep and exercise are short and long term, right? So you get a poor night's sleep, it's probably going to be a rougher day. You get a good night's sleep, you might notice some benefits for your cognition. And then, exercise, I think, is important, and particularly over the long term can help to kind of boost cognition.
And Rick has a problem with come in and want to get coffee, or whatever he is working on, he'll put something down, and then he can't seem to go and find it. So he spends a lot of time, or not, it's like, yeah, he spends a lot of time looking for things all the time, and
Yeah, so
so it's just like, even if he was working on a project for his drill, and he accidentally threw it away with some lumber, and our neighbor was going to throw something away, and he found the drill in the garbage can, or
Stuff
yeah.
like that.
But it's just like, where's my keys, wallet, phone, and so we spend a lot of time, and then I'm looking for it to spend it. So is there any?
So we're talking about losing things like around the house. There are some companies that have like wallets. They have credit cards that are like you can put tags on your luggage. You can have a credit card. It's not a credit card. You stick it in the wallet. It's a tile.
Yeah, but like just putting down his coffee.
So if you reduce clutter too, if you have things picked up a little bit more, it's less likely to. I mean.
It's a hard one. I know.
It is difficult. The other thing I would say is that everything has a home, right? Like, so when I walk in the door, my keys and my wallet, they go here.
That's
They-
me, but his
Right.
drop wherever. And
Right. But we can create those drop-off zones, right? So we can create these spots where things are gonna be. So,
He has Huntington, so he's
Yeah.
the one that just sort of misplaces your, to put the coffee pot in the microwave, and then it'll be beeping, and then you'll still won't know where it's at.
you had a question in the front?
Yeah, what about self-control, and when they become some aggressive, what kind of tips do you have to avoid that or to happen?
So the question was about self-control and aggression. I think gentle redirection is helpful, and I'm going to emphasize gentle. As Dr. Susky said, we don't want to create conflict or escalate the conflict, right? So if we can get someone's attention off the thing that is, making them distressed or making them agitated, and kind of get them to shift gears into something else, not make it a battle, I think that can be really helpful.
So what if you're the
What if you're the person?
But the answer directed to
Yourself.
someone who has it.
I mean, sometimes aggression and irritability can be better with medications too. Not that medications are always the answer, but we do have medications that can help with aggression and irritability too.
Yeah, I would say if you're the person, my favorite social worker, Amy Cheshire, is always telling me to extend a little grace, right? And that goes to other people, but also to yourself, right? So show yourself some grace. Take some deep breaths. If you're recognizing, I'm starting to feel kind of agitated, I'm starting to get worked up, do the things that you know that can help you bring it down a notch. And there actually is a lot of science behind just some simple deep breathing. There's science behind going for a walk, getting outdoors. All of those things can help bring things down a notch. And so if you're recognizing it, I'd find the thing that works for you that you can kind of implement pretty quickly to help you bring it down.
And if you have somebody that you really trust, and just say, listen, people want to know about when I should stop work, and I'm not there at work with them. So sometimes I say, find that coworker that you really trust and say, hey, listen, if I'm starting to do certain things, I want you to be honest with me. So sometimes reaching out and just having an open dialogue, say, listen, if you're noticing this, let me know. Yes.
So you talked about visual spatial awareness and eating difficulties. Are there tips for improving eating?
So eating also could be a movement problem and coordination, and the caudate nucleus controls a grip. So if we are doing this and not sustaining that muscle control, we might be dropping our utensils. So there's a lot of eating is very multitasking as well, but getting the bigger utensils. There are plates that have lips on them, so if kind of scoop and go. Trying to slow the process down, putting your fork down or spoon down in between each bite. But I don't know if I have an answer for the visual spatial problem. but just saying it could happen.
All right, I think it is just about 12 o'clock. I think there's time for one last question. And if not, I'm sure we're happy to stick around for a bit.